Exploring the bizarre. Your e-ticket ride into the world of the paranormal. Strap yourself in as we traverse the universe exploring the unexplained. UFOs, ghosts, lost worlds, cryptozoology, as well as other dimensions. It's time to take back the night. Now, your electrifying hosts of Exploring the Bizarre, Timothy Beckley and Tim Swartz.
Attention, people of the planet Earth. Brad Steiger has been picked up by the mothership and is on his way to the heavenly realms he wrote so devotingly about for over 50 years. He authored in the neighborhood of 200 books on UFOs and the paranormal, his sales figures being off the chart. There was hardly a language his work wasn't published in. His life was filled with wonderment as he undertook the task of trying to understand what makes the cosmos work. He was humble and caring, going about his way to be helpful to those who wished to follow in his pioneering footsteps as author and researcher. The show was initially recorded about a year ago and features some of his many friends. We bid you a fond farewell, Brother Brad, but we will always miss your kind words of encouragement and enlightenment, and wisdom from the other side now will be available to us.
This is Rick Hilberg of Cleveland, Ohio, and I'm the editor of Flying Saucer Digest. And I'm really delighted to be here tonight to pay tribute to paranormal author and researcher Brad Steiger.
And Rick, how long have you, what was the first book that you read by Brad? Do you remember?
I'll tell you, it was 50 years ago, almost 50 years ago. I was a young ufologist. I was publishing and editing my old original UFO magazine back in 1966, and later, sometime late in the year, I ran across a copy in the local bookstore of Brad's Strangers from the Skies. And immediately bought it up. I read as many UFO books as I could at the time in magazine articles, and that introduced me to Brad Steiger. It was a rather good overview of UFO history up until that time, and it even included some of the, as I recall, some of the stuff that happened back in March of '66 in Dexter, Michigan. So it was kind of an up-to-date book, and I was quite impressed with it.
And did you look for other books by Brad after that?
Yes, I did. I regularly at that time and a little bit later on, I was of course reading all the various UFO articles and paranormal articles that appeared in Saga magazine. So I caught a lot of Brad's articles that appeared in that particular publication, and some of his other books too. One that kind of impressed me at the time was what he did with in cooperation with Joan Reitner, and it was about the Allende letters, about the M.K. Jessup mystery, as well as some other silencing and Men in Black stuff. That was all the rage at that particular time.
Well, I believe there was a book that came out called "Flying Saucers Are Hostile."
Yes,
which of course I don't think we had ever used that term in relation to ufology. I don't know as if we also thought that UFOs were sweetness and light, but certainly this was before the era of Betty and Barney Hill and the abduction experiences and people being molested and Travis Walton being lifted up and examined and probed and so forth. So this was our first hint, I do believe, that there might be another darker side to ufology. And how would you say, Rick, over the years, your own work and research has been influenced by Brad?
Well, Brad has always had a very open mind about things, and I mean he's written on a tremendous wide range of paranormal topics. So it kind of impressed me. And I've tried to keep an open mind, as he does, and try to get as much information as I can in some of my publications and writing. And another thing that really impressed me, and here we go, we're going back to 1968. He and Reitner did an article about in Saga, and it was called. I pulled it up today just to read it and catch up. It was called Abominable Spacemen by Brad and Joan Reitner, and it was, I think, probably the first mention of the possible connection between the Bigfoot phenomenon and UFOs, because there are a number of cases in here. The swamp apes from down in Florida, skunk apes, whatever you want to call them, and some other cases that they brought forth. And I think this is the first time that this paranormal aspect was tagged onto the Bigfoot. Now, Bigfoot was only about 10 years old at that time. I think that the whole thing surfaced out in Northern California like circa 1958. So this was kind of early on, and I think he and Joan were the first people to try to make a connection. Even today, it's a very unpopular connection because many of the Bigfooters, refuse to accept some sort of paranormal explanation, and they prefer to, think it's a live, biological creature.
Well, we've certainly have all come a long way since those days. And Rick, I want to thank you for joining us. And Brad Steiger, this is your life, and you are king for a day, as far as we are concerned. And we were just saying just before the start of the show that we met almost 50 years ago. My goodness, that is longer than most people know each other unless they're members of the family. Well, we are actually family because this is Brother Brad, and he has been a friend and an associate and a cohort, and lectured at many of our conferences, and we've sang Christmas carols together, and we swam around with little rubber duckies in swimming pools, and celebrated my birthday together many times. Did autograph signings. I remember at the bookstore there in Phoenix, Arizona. We just have always had a marvelous working relationship. And Brad, welcome to Exploring the Bizarre.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much.
Yeah, well, this is a night we have been looking forward to. And Brad, what is your? I know you've written now. I think according to statistics, you have written 182 books.
That is correct.
And we're not talking about like normal size books. Some of these are the size of the New York telephone book, not like it is today, like it was 20 years ago.
Just about the size of the phone book. I'd like to comment on something Rick said about the UFOs and Bigfoot. That's when Keel and Tim Beckley and a number of us were writing regularly for Saga magazine. And I told Keel what we were going to do, and he said, you can't do it. There's no connection between UFOs and Bigfoot. And I said, well, just wait and see. And so he said, I'll bet you a dinner at a Chinese restaurant. Now, Keel was the one who introduced me to Chinese food.
Oh, my goodness.
Long before that, so he said, bet a Chinese dinner. So when the article came out, it was very gratifying to see John had written just a simple one-liner in the envelope saying, "You win." So he recognized, he accepted, and he began. Of course, he opened up so much of the area in combining the paranormal with what is happening with what we call ufology. And there have been a few of us who have always been open to that. But, at that time, now you all remember, you were around then too, bless your hearts. It was definitely nuts and bolts at that time. Definitely. And I remember I would not have called the book Flying Saucers Are Hostile. I thought that was, I learned in semantics classes, to avoid allness statements. And that, to me, I can't remember, I had some, one they considered too too cotton ballish, I guess, but it was flying saucers. Flying saucers are maybe bad for your health or something like that. But it wasn't.
Who we
Go ahead.
We are forgetting about here is our other co-host, Tim Schwartz. I don't think.
Oh my goodness!
Yeah,
the Schwartzer.
That's right. The two Tims are here to molest the airwaves.
Oh yeah, that's a good way to put it. Molest the airways. Oh well, I mean, it's how can I talk here, Tim and Brad, when I mean, we've got you two on, and I am just really humbled to be here with both of you tonight. Because my earliest books were from Tim and Brad. Brad, I think actually the first paranormal based book that I ever bought was yours. It was a paperback called Voices from Beyond.
Yeah.
And I still have that, in fact.
That's interesting. Ricardo, who does so much of the art for our books, that's the first book he said, Voices from Beyond. So those voices must have been pulling you in.
That's right.
But you have nothing to apologize, Mr. Schwartz. You have remarkable accomplishments, and Sherry and I appreciate so much the really classy work that you have contributed to our books. And I mean, you definitely are in the family line. You're in the family tree.
Well, thank you very much. I really owe it a lot to you.
Well, thank you.
Brad, it was June, Kenneth Arnold's anniversary of the sighting over Mount Rainier, June 24th, 1967, I believe, that you and I first bumped into each other, shoulder to shoulder, at Jim Mosley's infamous or famous UFO conference that was held in the summer of 1967 at the Commodore Hotel in New York, which attracted a crowd of over 8,000 people. Of course, this was at the height of the swamp gas, right? Wasn't this around the time of the sightings? There was a lot of activity.
The swamp, yeah, swamp gas. That's what made Strangers from the Skies a bestseller in 2 weeks, because the book came out just when wonderful Dr. J. Allen Hynek was quoted as saying that. Now, Sherry worked for Hynek up until the time of his death, so he was constantly trying to say, well, that's not what I meant, or that's not what I said. But in any way, he was quoted as saying that. And the book came out just when he was saying that. Everyone was talking. UFOs were in the mainstream on the news, and the book just took off. Now, interestingly, before that time, I really had written nothing about UFOs. The paranormal was my field, and I was under contract to do a book, Strange Guests, the poltergeist phenomena. And but something entered in that really threw things off, but yet put it back on track in the greatest way. That's when I acquired a number of personal belongings of Rudolph Valentino, the great lover.
There you go.
So I was brought to New York in 66, put up in the magnificent Roosevelt Hotel, and I finished the book there, working, with people that come over from the publisher and pick up a chapter every day. And when it was finished, I had my exposure to the first New York type cocktail party, and there were editors there from many, many houses. Mm-hmm. And they said, after reading the first draft of Valentino, they said I was going to be the next Harold Robbins, because I say with a blush there were some kind of sexy parts in Valentino. So I was going to be the next Harold Robbins, and I was going to write these big, lusty bestsellers. And then my agent spoke up and said, nah, Brad is interested in writing cookbooks, as he calls them.
Oh.
Cookbooks, did you say? Cookbooks?
And, well, that got the attention of people from several different houses. What do you mean by cookbooks? And I said, well, that's my agent's disparaging term for books about the paranormal. Well, I just moved this very quickly. By the end of the evening, I was listening to story after story, paranormal experience from all the various editors from the different houses. One fellow particularly, who became a good friend at Award Books, said, have you ever done anything on UFOs? And I said, well, I have stacks of information. I have file drawers full, but no. He said, well, why don't you tackle UFOs? So I said, okay. But in addition to that, I went home with the contracts from 5 different publishing houses. So it didn't hurt me at all to be branded an author of cookbooks, because at that time in 1966, the field was just kind of waking up, and everyone wanted one.
Well, I think we also should tell the listeners that was probably the heyday, or pretty close to it, of paperback books.
Yes.
And you could buy a paperback book almost anywhere. And we're not just talking about today. If you go into maybe a pharmacy, you'll find the top 15 or 20 paperbacks if you're lucky, right?
Right.
And those days, it was wall-to-wall paperbacks and all kinds of subjects. I know romances were big, and historical books, and even westerns, and then the paranormal, where today you got to kind of hunt around and park your behind at Barnes and Noble in order to get the the latest available title. It's a whole different ball game today.
Entirely.
Indeed.
You were so right to point that out, Tim, because that's what really. I think you could still get some books for maybe not a quarter anymore, but 35 cents or 50 cents. I think some of those early paperbacks of mine were like 50 cents.
50 cents,
and they took off and added the readership and eager readership that would not have found it. So, as you say, it's an entirely different ball game now. And as a author, writer friend of mine said, who had just come out with a new book, he says, this is probably the worst time in history to undergo any business that has to do with paper. And sadly, I weep for that. It has changed. It is completely. I started writing for the pulp magazines. I started writing and selling when I was in college. I was writing for the pulp magazines. And the young writers today won't have that experience. They probably don't even know what I mean when I say pulp magazine.
Brad, I think we have someone else waiting in the wings here to say hello. Are you there, Alan?
Alan Greenfield here, and Brad Steiger, this is your life. Eat your heart out, Ralph Edwards. Da, 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 da. That's okay. You can ask me the same thing as Rick. What was the first book I read? I can't think that far back, but I think it was that book about Ekankar, In My Soul I'm Free. Does that sound like something I could have read when I was but a boy? Yeah, I did. And the funny thing is, I still use that technique, not with the belief system, but with my free Illuminist students for scrying. So I learned from that. And then, Brad, this is very interesting because I've been writing for little magazines since 1960. Back in the day when I was but a callow youth. But when it first came out, your book, The Fellowship, which is now, like expensive resale, which I know you don't get a penny for, but
No.
well, some of my out-of-print books go for hundreds of dollars, and the truth is,
Right.
once it's gone, you don't get any residuals. It's like the Three Stooges. They died in poverty, even though their stuff was constantly on because they had no follow-up.
Constantly.
But anyway, I read
Yeah.
The Fellowship, and up until then, I had been I was okay. I was down with things like the Hill case, but I really did not buy into the notion of spiritual communications with ultra-terrestrial beings, to borrow the term from Keel. And
Right.
it was a turning point for me. And shortly after that, I got the information that led to the publication of my first book, which was at 50, which Illuminate Press was kind enough to pick up. Beckley certainly knows this, with A Secret Cipher, the Euphonauts. Couldn't have written it without having read The Fellowship first, because I wouldn't have looked into those kind of cases and the strange names that they seem to come up with in those.
Right.
And I also wanted to mention that since you've been writing, the co-authoring with Sherry, I don't know how much she influences it, but with Tim Beckley, I can't say oversized, but the larger paperbacks with the illustrations like Monsters Among Us, those are terrific. I mean, those are very contemporary. They're almost coffee table books, and maybe that's, in tune with the times, so I hope they do well. And finally, your most recent that I've read is Real Visitors. Plug. Great book, and really on the same wavelength I am. So I'm happy that I've known you all these years. You helped my career immensely. So that's my spiel. What else? Tim,
well, that's a wonderful byproduct, Alan, to have helped your career. I know you didn't need any help because you are endlessly talented, as you prove with everything you do, but I really appreciate your saying that. I want to go back in something that probably only Tim knows, is because I can remember discussing it with him at the time. When Strangers from the Skies came out, as I said, through no fault or wonderfulness of myself, it was, priced right and paperback, and became a paperback bestseller in 2 weeks and went in everywhere. Well, then, of course, I was invited to speak at this conference and that conference and so forth. And I began to meet an extraordinary number of what we call contactees. I don't think we had too many abductees in '66. There were some, but we didn't have that many. But the contactees, I would listen respectfully. I would hear what they were saying. Sometimes then I would get telephone calls from someone, and they didn't know each other, maybe from Oregon and Ohio, maybe on the same night, saying that they had received a message from their contact, Mura from Mars or wherever, and it would be word for word. And I know these people didn't know each other, at least I was quite certain, but it'd be the same word. And I remember talking to Tim one time, we were in New York, and I said, Tim, I feel like I'm back in the paranormal. I feel like I'm back in the seance circles. I feel like I'm back
That's exactly what I think is going on. I mean, Ashtar shows up over and over and over in unrelated, obscure cases.
We have a break. We have a break coming up, and Alan, I want to thank you for joining us. And
throw me off the air, Tim. I'm used to it. I've been in better bars than this one. Hey. Brad, have a wonderful evening with the other guests.
Well, thank you so much, and let's keep in touch, okay?
We will do that indeed.
Now back to exploring the bizarre with two of the most electrifying researchers in the paranormal. Your hosts, Timothy Beckley and Tim Swartz.
Well, here we are back.
Back once again.
Yeah. Back with Exploring the Bizarre. And tonight we have a very special guest, our longtime friend and associate, Brad Steiger. And Tim, did you have a couple of questions?
Oh my gosh,
Yeah.
where can I start? Brad, I think that a lot of us would like to know what actually got you started. We've all been coming on saying that probably you were the one that was responsible for getting us started. Interest in the paranormal and UFOs and things like that. But what about you? What was your influence?
Growing up in the house, I did. We were on the site of the old stagecoach stop, the very one that the James gang went to the great Minnesota raid, the Northfield, Minnesota raid. They stopped there. And growing up in the house, I guess there are a lot of passengers who are still waiting for their ride, because my sister and I would encounter people dressed in clothing of probably the 1880s or 90s. We heard the sound of... Now, I am old enough so that I remember farming with horses. And, of course, in this house, we had no electricity, no running water, no indoor facilities. So it was very much the way it was. And even though we had horses for the field work, we didn't have horses that pulled stagecoaches. And we'd hear the thundering sound of hoofs and stagecoach coming down. And this continued. Even after we tore the house down and built a new one, the manifestation stayed there. So I accepted the paranormal. My mother, and bless her heart and soul, who has left us, but if she had chosen, she could have been a spirit medium. She did communicate with certain of the people that visited at night. There was a particular lady that would come and give instructions that she would relay to my father about, you better hurry up with the planting because there's going to be a deluge and things will wash away and that sort of thing. So it was a part of life. And then when I was roughly 5 years old, I caught a Nissa, as we called them with our Scandinavian background, or an elf, as you might call him. I caught him spying on my parents. And then I'll never forget, as he turned slowly and we made eye contact, I somehow knew this was going to be a lifelong relationship. And it has been, because I speak respectfully when I say the little bugger, but he still likes to play tricks on me and test me and see, if I'll fall for something or not. And sometimes they're very clever and it takes a while. So it was just a part of my life. I was encouraged to do vast reading by my grandmother, who was the town librarian, had been an English teacher. The town library consisted of her own personal library. She had that many books. And then she bequeathed them to the town, and she still had enough books at home to have 2 library rooms that I would sit and study. And she saw early that I was tending, and she would order books on psychic phenomena, some of the great British books. I don't think there were that many American authors or American titles at that time, but there were a good number of Brits who were writing, and the Society for Psychical Research that was formed, of course, toward the end of the 1800s. And she would order those books for me, but she'd always give me great caution, now you must always keep balance. You must keep your spiritual balance. So when I went out ambitiously ghost hunting, I had no fear. I had no apprehension because, I had been startled numerous times, when suddenly a shadow person or whatever appears in front of you, or the rapping on the walls. You never quite get used to that. and the sounds of footsteps thudding up and down the stairs. You never quite get used to that. But it was nothing that really frightened once my ratiocination, as Edgar Allan Poe would call it, would take over. My mind would take over and reason what it was. So it wasn't until when I was formally ghost researching that I had some very physical experiences that I really had not had before. It was always the stagecoach riders, as they call them, or passengers, excuse me. That seemed to be like watching a movie. And it was if, I could see them, they couldn't see me. Every once in a while, one would stop and make contact, and that eye contact. And that was a very eerie feeling. I'm getting kind of a little shiver right now as I'm recalling, saying, now, this one can obviously see me. The others I had rationalized were, it's the theory of an impression of energy on the environment, the spirit residue, as we call it. So that was, like 95% of what I had encountered until I began encountering some very, I don't really want to say violent, because hands were never put on me, but doors were smashed open, violence, things thrown around the room, where you definitely feel that my intellectual attitude, my rationalization that everything can be explained, had come up against something, and by thunder, they wanted to know that I recognized there were differences.
Well, and that's that's something that I wanted to point out is that you see a lot of these so-called ghost hunters now, especially the ones on television, who take a very almost frivolous attitude towards this, like they're young and they think that they're going to live forever, yet. As you just said, from your own experiences, this is not something to be trifled with. This is something that can be very dangerous.
Indeed. And as I know, yes, there have been some very unfortunate circumstances just within the last 2 years of people being killed while ghost hunting through an accident, or people then accidents involving others where fatalities were involved. So just from that standpoint alone, and I just look at these, it seems from our email that every town with a population of at least 500 has their ghost hunting group now. It's their little paranormal research society. And they're all experts because they've seen, maybe they've read a couple of my books, like the big fat one that's been out for some years, Real Ghosts, Restless Spirits, and Haunted Places, because that's often referred to, and then a particular television show or two, and they're experts now. They think they should have their own program.
And some of them do.
Lecture.
And some of them do have their own program.
And some of them do.
Hey, well, Brad, you know what I'd like to know now? When you started first doing this, right, and you did your first UFO book, did you ever think that you would make a career out of this? I mean, was this something you really wanted to do, or did you want to be an author and, you were offered these book deals, and so you kind of took them? When did you really get hooked?
Oh, I guess the first time that little Nissa, when I caught him spying on my parents, that's when I got hooked, I guess.
Oh, you did? Okay.
But no, I could. There are two things that I've ever wanted to be, and one was a cowboy, and one was a writer. And I realized that cowboy probably existed only in the Republic double feature on Saturday night, and that writing is, of course, what I really wanted.
Well, you would have made
And
a great Tom Mix.
I think I would have. But studying history is my passion. Archaeology, anthropology. That's my essential reading. I'm fascinated with history, and
Well, you were teaching, right? I mean, when you first got into this, yes.
Yes, I was, and of course, a couple of those guys now, David Drake, who's been writing science fiction novels. I think he's trying to catch up with me. He was one of my high school students.
Oh, my
John
goodness.
Carradine, who's writing mystery novels, he was one of my high school students. We still keep in touch, which is a wonderful thing. And a number of the girls, they are now women, they are now mothers, they are grandmothers. That was interesting. On my birthday last year, a number of them wrote and said, I didn't realize how close we were together in age when we were teaching. And that was the thing, when you're teaching, you're old. I can remember my first year of teaching, I wasn't 21 yet. And when the junior-senior prom came around, the committee asked if I had, the theme was the Roaring Twenties. They came around and asked if I had any clothing from the 20s left over that they might wear. This was 1957, and I had not yet turned 21, and I was teaching.
Now we're looking for clothes from the 60s.
Right. So yes, I did begin teaching. I love teaching, and it was then I was teaching in college when Valentino hit, Strangers from the Skies hit, all those things hit. I was being asked to go and lecture. I was asked to go on this show and that show. And in those days, we couldn't do it this way. I had to be in, well, Tim, you remember, you had to be in the studio to do a show, right?
Yeah.
You didn't do it live.
I just recently, I was so tired of doing this stuff on the telephone and on Skype. When Paul Eno asked me to be on his show, I said, I'll come on your show, but I'm going to take the train up to Woonsocket. And actually go into the studio, because I hadn't been in we used to travel around the country. We went to every little radio station everywhere, right? I mean,
exactly.
There were radio stations. Well, I guess the radio stations are still there, but they're all, playing the same programs. Now they start out with Rush Limbaugh and end with, George Norrie, and it's the local radio. I mean, there were a lot of guys in those days, in Cleveland and Denver and all, that were kind of into the subjects. And, if you wrote a book or you had some experience, you could call them up. And even if they weren't big believers, they would invite you on, And so
at least as a novelty.
Yeah, well, we had a lot of friends and contacts in those days, and now, of course, it's pretty much on the internet, So, but what are you going to do? But it's still something we cherish doing, and we have the memories, very, very fond memories.
We certainly do. Certainly do.
Years, yeah. Do you remember the first show that you ever did?
Yeah, I think it was in Detroit.
Uh-huh.
And again, I was teaching. I got on the train in La Crosse, Wisconsin, and went to Detroit, did a radio show. Now my memory comes back. Okay, I'm coming right from teaching, right? Mm-hmm. Where college teaching, where, of course, when you have a disagreement with a fellow instructor, professor, it's done in a very scholarly manner. It used to be. I know things have changed, but it used to be, I beg to disagree with you, but if you will consider this point more carefully, that sort of thing. So when I went on this show, it was a woman, and she was an experienced woman. You'd tell she'd had the show for a number of years. Very nice. And I would take calls or people from the audience, and some would insult me, someone would attack me, and I would answer, of course, very courteously and so forth. After the program, she said, you know, if you're going to survive doing these talk shows, you've got to be more aggressive. You've got to defend yourself better. Probably 5 years I was back in Detroit doing a number of shows, and I was on her show. Well, then, of course, it was the reborn Brad Steiger. He wasn't a professor anymore. And after that show, she said, wow, you really took my words to heart.
Well, there you go. Well, I think we have another guest with us. Brent, are you out there? Hello? Brent Rains, are you there? No, I guess not. Okay. Yes, he is. All right, but then he has to answer us. Anyway, this has been a wonderful evening. I mean, we could have had so many people wanted to come on the program, but you know, you got to kind of limit it because this gets pretty hectic. You know, calling people and trying to line them up and fitting them into the schedule and everything. So, when did this latest book of yours come out, Brad?
Came out, I can tell you precisely, April 12th. George Knapp, you know, our good friend George.
Yes.
His producer called, Chris Burrows called and said, George doesn't have time to do an interview, but, you know, he'd like to help you out by just giving a preview of the book. Well, it was a terrific preview. He said fabulous things about the book. And although it wouldn't be released, because this was March 20th, people began jumping the gun. People began buying it. Within an hour, I noticed on Amazon, I was number 3 bestseller and number 3, you know, most exciting new book type of thing, which is the way it can happen, you know, when people are, when things are presented in a way. And Sherry and I feel really good about this book. I mean, I feel that this says so much what some of the other guys were alluding to. You know, we've developed so much farther in this book.
Well, I think we have Brent Rains. Are you on the other line there? Hello?
I'm here. Hey, Tim.
You're here.
Brother Brent, are you there?
Hey, Brother Brad. I'm doing fine. I'm all here now.
Brother Brent, my gosh. And we got Swartzy, and we've got everyone on tonight. That's fabulous.
So tell us, when did you first get a Brad Steiger book?
Well, I started out as a teenager at age 14 in 67, and let's see, I think it was Strangers from the Skies was one of the first books, probably sometime around 68, 69, when I had my first Steiger book. And, you know, I became very interested early on because of Brad and the whole contactee phenomenon. And because of the very first contactee I met was mentioned in his book, The Aquarian Revelations, published, I think, in 71.
Well, I think I was mentioned on page 3 of that book, if I remember correctly, yeah.
Wow.
You're mentioned in more than one.
Well, that was the book about the two girls the two ladies up in Canada, right?
Yeah.
Excuse me. That was Aquarian Revelations.
So go ahead, Brent. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you there. Continue on.
No, well, it was in August of 1971. The first contactee I met was mentioned in that book, Joan Howard, up in Toronto. And just sort of incorporated that into family vacation, you know. My mom and dad wanted to go on a trip, and I suggested Canada. And had a wonderful time, spent several hours with this Joan Howard and her husband Walter, and heard all sorts of very fascinating stories that were the kind that we're all very familiar with now. She had mediumistic abilities, come from England, and she had lots of out-of-body type experiences and seeing UFOs and even encountered the Men in Black. And, of course, as a young researcher, I was just very fascinated with all of it, as I still am today. And so that's how it began. Now, I didn't actually start contacting directly with Brad I think until 1979. I called him up, and he was out in Arizona at the time, in Scottsdale, Arizona, as I recall. And but we were both affiliated with the old Saucer Scoop magazine. I just looked at an issue from 1969, and there I was, the main director, branch director, and you were on the advisory panel. And of course, the editor, Joan Whitnor, she was, you and her had written quite a number of features back around that time, some books and magazine articles. So anyway, yeah, three main people I tell everybody was a great influence on me evolving in the field was Brad and John Keel and Jacques Vallée.
Well, three really great individuals as far as the field goes. You can't do any better than that. But Brent, you've certainly been active over all these years. You have your Alternate Perceptions magazine, and how many you're almost up to issue 300 by now?
Well, it's 218 right now.
Well, then by the end of the year you'll be at 300. Yeah.
Well, it'll take a few years, but I'm optimistic. And we got my first book. I've got two out, one of which you published. The second one, the On the Edge of Reality, and of course the Visitors from Hidden Realms in 2004. I was very proud of my 6-page introduction by Brad. There were a lot of common points, and that we shared perspectives on all of this.
Well, Brad, let me ask you this: of all the subjects that you've written about, which do you find the most fascinating?
Well, to me, Tim, I know we've talked about this many times. Excuse me. It is clear to me that all the subjects are more and more becoming one. We don't have separateness here. We have one. We have a oneness, and something is leading us toward that. Now, each of you on the program right now, I know in one way or another, share that belief. That, Tim, we started with Men in Black, and we started going here and going there and doing all the conferences, and Tim and Brent, you've been doing a great job with your writing and so forth. But I think we see now, when we talk about poltergeist, ghost, UFO, contactee, when we see ancient figures, when we see increasingly going back farther, mankind, humankind is older than, I mean, when I was in college, it was said that the Native Americans came to America about the time of Jesus Christ. Well, we know that's been pushed back so much. Now we've got, the Incas and the Mayas, and we're pushing back more and more, and we're making more discoveries. So my big fascination has always been, who are we really?
Well,
what is our purpose?
We're going to find out after the next break. And Brent, I want to thank you for joining us and being part of our.
Well, it was my pleasure. My pleasure and honor.
We'll be right back.
Exploring the bizarre. Your e-ticket ride into the world of the paranormal. Strap yourself in as we traverse the universe, exploring the unexplained. UFOs, ghosts, lost worlds, cryptozoology, as well as other dimensions. It's time to take back the night. Now, your electrifying hosts of Exploring the Bizarre, Timothy Beckley and Tim Swartz.
Welcome back to this second hour of Exploring the Bizarre. I'm Tim Swartz, and tonight I'm just absolutely thrilled. We have Brad Steiger with us. And Brad, before we had to go to break on the last segment of the program, you were talking about your fascination with the question of where did we come from? How long have we been here? And I remember a paperback book that I had that you had written, and I wish I could remember exactly what the title was. I want to say it was Atlantis Rising. I mean, I know there's a magazine by that name, but was that the title of the book, Atlantis Rising?
Yes, Atlantis Rising, which of course led then to Mysteries of Time and Space, and to Worlds Before Our Own.
Well, it was that book, Atlantis Rising, that really got me going as well into that whole idea that we may not necessarily be the first technological civilization on this planet. I mean, and you opened my eyes to a lot of this type of antediluvian stuff. And I mean, do you think that that could be the fact that that there were societies that maybe just as technologically prominent or even more so than we are, sometime in the past? Mm-hmm.
As the ice keeps melting, guys, we're going to see more and more, as in Antarctica and other places that are slowly being revealed. Though the Atlantis Rising had a strange history. At that time, Gail Christopherson was editor at Dell, and she had been a friend when I was coming up through the ranks, writing articles and so forth. And she called me and said, "How would you like to do a book on Atlantis?" And I said, "Well, I happen to be fascinated. I don't know if there was such a literal place, but I think we have prehistory. We have examples of prehistory." Now, this is written, as you're recalling, this was written quite a few years ago. Mm-hmm. So we've had a lot of discovery since, which we've tried to include in updating in our new book in the last chapters, in which we're dealing with things like evolution and hybrids and so forth. So the book came out unusually. Well, a weird thing happened. Walt Disney got a copy of it, and they wanted to do a movie based on it. But that meant the book couldn't be released until they had the movie pretty well in the can so that they could start promotion. Well, who was I to say no to Big Walt and the gang? So I said, okay, well, it got 1 year and then another year and then another year. And finally, I thought, I got so much good stuff in here and now new stuff. So that's when I had an opportunity with Prentice Hall to do a book, Mysteries of Time and Space, which deals with that. Now, one of the tricky things in it, and I'm not trying to start a feud, and I say this not in deprecation at all, but because of the delay of the book, Von Daniken's book then came out like 2 years before it did. So it had to have, in the tradition of Erich von Daniken's Chariots of the Gods, when actually, of course, it would have been out 2 or 3 years before. Oh my God. But that's show business, as they say. So
well, now, was there a tie-in? Was there a tie-in with the Disney movie?
No. They went. They finally dropped it, and they did this weird thing about two brothers in old Atlantis or something. I could barely sit through it, but it. I mean, it. There again, as you know, guys, this is the business. You can have your heart broken every day if you let it happen. But that was certainly a breaker because my kids, because I'd come home from a meeting with Disney and I'd have Mickey Mouse pens and Donald Duck this and Donald Duck that. No, and you can imagine to kids, Daddy has a book, it's going to be Disney, ha, look at us, look at the new pen he brought back today. And of course, it just didn't happen. It just did not happen. But that led to worlds before our own, that led to mysteries of time and space. But interestingly, I keep saying that because all of life, I guess, is interesting to me. But so many, what's the right word? Orthodox archaeologists have written to me confiding that even though Atlantis is just bull roar, and most of the things I wrote about were bull roar, they still said that was the book that inspired them to go into archaeology or anthropology. Such is life.
That's gratifying to hear, I know. Well, Brad, I think that we have somebody else on the line that wants to talk to you. Paul, are you with us?
As far as I know.
All right, fantastic. We have Paul Eno on the line.
Well, Brad, I'm very sorry to say that we don't know each other. I don't know how that happened, but you were an influence on me, to say the least, from the early 70s. For some reason, in my seminary library in Connecticut was a copy of one of the November editions, 1972, of the Winona Daily News from Minnesota. There were two stories that really captured my imagination. I'd been involved in my first ghost investigation, quote unquote, the previous year, and there was a story about a young man who had never played the piano before, who sat down and started playing melodies from like 16th or 17th century England, right? Do you remember that?
Yes.
Okay, well, you have a good memory.
Yes.
There was also a story about...
It wasn't in England. It was in Iowa.
Oh, it was, but it had occurred the previous year, I think 1971, if I recall. But,
right. That was
I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
No, I was just saying, this struck me. I said, this is a man who thinks, if I may use a term that wasn't even a cliche that wasn't even invented then, a man who thinks outside the box. And I was very impressed because I was already running into things that did not fit the old mold of ghosts and things. It just wasn't good enough. And you were an inspiration to me to look further. And I thank you for that. And
wonderful.
I have to say that certainly a prolific and versatile author. The number of books you read, it takes me 5 years to write a book, so you make me sick in a way, but I'm a great admirer.
Brad,
certainly a versatile Renaissance man in the field, all aspects of paranormal, biographies, prehistory, even detective stories that I've run into.
Brad, Brad, Paul has a weekly show out of Woon, Woon, in Woonsocket, Rhode Island. It's Behind the Paranormal. Now, interestingly enough, I've been on his show a couple of times, but interestingly enough, and certainly by pure coincidence, as everything is in this field, 50 years previously, one of the first shows I ever did was with a gentleman who had the noon, I believe it was the noon talk show up there by the name of Joseph Ferrier. If you remember him, Brad, he had all these amazing photographs that he took all over Rhode Island. Right. Cigar-shaped objects. Yes,
I do remember. Yes.
Anyway, they're at the same. Of course, Joe passed away a couple of years ago, but Paul has been active at the station now for how many years you've been up there now, Paul?
Oh well, since we started in Phoenix in 08. This is 09. So going on 6-7 years now, with my son.
And very good program. So
well, you came all the way up from New York to be on it, so I hope that Brad would consider that an invitation.
I was just telling them that before because I hadn't been in an actual radio studio in years since everything is done on Skype or over the telephone. Mm-hmm. I didn't even believe that studios existed anymore.
Well, Brad, you wouldn't have to come all the way from California. It would be a pleasure to have you by any medium.
Let me say a little bit more about the case Paul brought up. The chapter does refer to people who get inspirational music and so forth. But then there are no coincidences, I have come to believe long ago. A Methodist minister who was a friend of mine said he had the strangest case. His daughter was going with this young man who had never had a lesson. He never sat down. The family didn't even know over piano. But when he came to visit them, he sat down and just played beautiful, what sounded like classical music. So, of course, I had to hear this for myself. And then, life stretches so beautifully sometimes. I sent a tape to a cousin who sat beside me in the band in high school and played the saxophone. She was now at a college, teaching at a college in California. She had married the music director of that college. I sent him a copy of the tape, and he went bananas. He just said, I cannot believe. I mean, he says, you have the work and a Spiritual Frontiers Fellowship. I don't know if you even remember that, or if you
I remember that.
participated. Pardon me?
Boyce Beatty.
Okay.
Yeah,
Exactly. Yeah. And that was composed of great many, especially Methodist ministers, it seemed to me. But I had, of course, not officially the church perimeter on it. I'm not suggesting that. But we had all these people who had heard it and had witnessed it. And so I just had to put that in my book, Revelation of the Divine Fire, because there are all kinds of revelation. And certainly music is one of our basic and one of our most profound, because, it's the universal language. And this, how do you tune in to this universe? This kid, no offense, if he's a growing grandpa now and listening, he wasn't particularly sharp. He wasn't particularly bright, but he sat down. He wasn't, in help or that way, but, I would say as a former teacher, he was probably, a high D student. And he's playing this beautiful music. So yes, that's another type of inspiration, and it's interesting that you recall that story, because it in those days too, and Tim will back this up, our little stories might appear in saga or whatever, but they suddenly found their way to all kinds of newspapers and so forth across the country.
That's right.
Well, also too, there were how many tabloids in those days?
Oh, goodness. How many?
Yeah. My favorite was actually a terrible title, but the best of the lot was the Tattler. If
Right.
Our friend Cliff Linedecker worked there, and a lot of the guys ended up, I think they were out of Chicago, and
Yes.
then they ended up going, after they folded, they ended up going to Florida and working for the Inquirer, and Cliff did quite a few books and works on country western singers and paranormal, I believe, and quite a few other books and works and all.
Do you remember, Tim, that I had a weekly column in the Tattler?
I don't remember that, but okay. Well, that was one of my that was one of my favorites, and I contributed an article or two every week, some under my own name and some under other names, because they didn't want anything to be written by the same three authors. Well, the tabloids was a great field to work in, and especially the Tattler. They really didn't change too much of anything. They would come up with maybe a hokey a headline or so, as opposed to like the Inquirer. I remember one time I used to write for the Star, the National Star.
Right.
It started out as a newspaper, and they sent me a check. I don't know, you used to pay fairly decent money. And it was an article that I had done on Irene Hughes, who you had actually written a book about. She was the psychic there out of Chicago. And, I went out and I paid a quarter or 50 cents or whatever it was for the Star to see my article. And usually they didn't use your byline. They either used the byline of some reporter who rewrote the article, or they didn't have any on there at all. And I looked through that newspaper. I must have spent an hour, and I could not find it anywhere, the article. So I called Steve Dunleavy, who was the editor of the paper at the time. And of course, he was on TV and all, made quite a reputation for himself in years later on. And I said, Steve, where's the article that you just paid me for? And he says, oh, it's on page like 18 or 19 or whatever it was. And I looked, and sure enough, there it was. It was an 8-page article when I wrote it. It was down to 6 little paragraphs on the bottom of the newspaper. With you couldn't even. Well, so I sold it to somebody else. I mean, well,
yeah. Why not? Why not?
Yeah.
It really hadn't been published yet.
No,
speaking
indeed.
as a newspaper editor, it served you right too.
But yeah, there were a lot of markets, and a lot of people got started in the field working for the tabloids and all, and people kind of look at it as if it's something downscale or something that all the stories are made up, and the UFO articles actually were not. In fact, I have this to say for the Inquirer, they paid decent money, they paid right away, and
exactly.
they had fact checkers. I mean, if I did an interview with a celebrity, they wanted to hear the tape, and sometimes they would even call the individual or the agent on the phone to make sure that I hadn't made it up.
And for a time, which got to be kind of annoying, the great Father Pope, any article that had to do with the paranormal, the reporters had to send it to me to get my okay if it seemed authentic or not. Now, I didn't get paid for that. So that's why I say it got to be a little tiring for a time. But then I couldn't complain because, they did some incredible articles on me and the research and so forth. So I considered that kind of an old-fashioned bargain.
Well, I remember there were a couple of articles I have in the drawer here that were in the Weekly World News, which was also owned by the Inquirer, but that was kind of like your national lampoon. But every once in a while, you see a photo of Brad Steiger in there, or somebody you'd recognize, and you wonder, how did that get in there? And of course, some people couldn't separate. Some people couldn't quite grasp when an article was like, supposed to be satire or when it was supposed to be serious. And frankly, even the writers got a little confused. Actually, the Weekly World News still has a website, and every once in a while, they're not owned by the same people or anything anymore. In fact, I don't know who's in charge of it, but every once in a while, they still review one of my books on there.
Well, great.
So
great.
That and Batboy.
Can't complain about that.
Indeed not. So, Brad, what's the next thing that what's coming out in your down the road?
Well, it's forming. We have a loose title, Haunted, Malevolent Ghosts, Night Terrors, and Threatening Phantoms.
Threatening
Now
Phantoms.
That's not going to be a typical ghost book. Really getting into what are ghosts really? Why do we catalog them in certain ways? Are they here? Are they really entities of the dead? Are they independent entities? Are they teachers? Are they just really exploring it? What is the manifestation that is worldwide, that is shared, by every civilization extant now and every civilization that was ever? So what is this? And
well, now you've got to do an interview with Paul for the book, because Paul has some very unique ideas on hauntings and spirits and ghosts. He believes that they are parasites.
That's I've already written that in one of my books on spirit. Well,
That's
two
right.
books I've written on spirit parasites. So yes, we share that. Yes,
and
that's one type.
Mm-hmm.
Any more any more UFO books?
Well, this one, Tim, when I was a boy on the farm, out baling hay when it was horribly hot and throwing from the baler up to the wagon, we'd probably lift, 700, 800 bales a day. And my dad had this habit of whenever we picked up the last one and put on the cart, he would let out a yell and said, "This is the one we've been looking for." And I kind of feel that, and Sherry does, in terms of the subjects we cover. This is the one we've been looking for. We've had many people say it's our best book yet, which always gives the author kind of mixed feelings because, well, you mean you didn't like the others? Well, they're not saying that, but that's one of those things that people say, and we appreciate the spirit in which they're saying it. But we really think we have covered so much. We are privileged to have scientific thesis by legitimate PhDs, some of them with 3 or 4, some who have worked with the Army, some who have worked with nuclear power, writing their thesis of what they believe our visitors are, voices from beyond in parallel dimensions. And the compliment that seems to us, that these people are, rather than publishing in the scientific journals, they chose to contribute to this book and share, I think, ideas that are just going to rattle the teeth of some of the skeptics and some of us who have loved a particular theory. We don't want to take it away, but maybe we ask you to just expand that theory a little bit. So we are really shamelessly proud of the new book.
Now,
well
do
done.
you think that there's ever come a time when this could be proved scientifically, any of this?
It's interesting. We subscribe, Sherry subscribed for years, and we've extended it to New Scientist that's published in Great Britain. And they've been having so many astonishing articles saying, we don't know really what's going on. I mean, these are Britain's top scientists, America's, Yugoslavia, Russia, whatever, they contribute to this magazine. And more are admitting, we don't know what's going on. We really don't know. We don't know what time is.
We've got a break coming up. This is our last break, and then we'll be on for the last segment of Explore.
Okay.
Now back to exploring the bizarre with 2 of the most electrifying researchers in the paranormal. Your hosts, Timothy Beckley and Tim Swartz.
I can't feel except very humble when I hear that every week. It's just such a anyway, this is Tim Beckley, and I'm here with my co-host Tim Swartz, and we are doing a tribute tonight to our longtime friend and associate, Brad Steiger. Brad Steiger, this is your life. King for a night. And we have with us this segment our friend there from Texas, Nick Redfern, who's trying to catch up with Brad. Has done 182 books, and we figure that by the year 2072, Nick will be caught up with him.
Yeah, I will never catch up with Brad. I can tell you that for certain. I think I'm at like 36. So 36 to 180, it's not going to happen.
Well, I think you might do it, Nick.
Well, I mean, if somebody comes up with a secret to immortality or to where we can live to 200, then I might catch up.
Right. Right.
Unless that happens, even I can't sort of do a book a week, So.
Leave that to Tim Swartz and I.
There you
go. I think we're up to about 227. Something like. Well, of course, that's not what we've written. We've only written about 120 of those, but we've got a lot of other authors, including over the years, Brad has done quite a few books for us. In fact, we had editions of Divine Revelations and the Atlantis book and so forth. But Nick, tell us what is the first book that you ever read by Brad?
Well, I can tell you that I can't honestly tell you what the first paranormal book I ever read was, but it was certainly when I was about 11, and I was getting into stuff like John Keel and Brad's books, and sort of early, Charles Burlett's books, that kind of thing. When I was, like I said, I was sort of 10, 11, 12, something like that. And the first one, which I can tell you absolutely sure of Brad's I read, was Mysteries of Time and Space, and it came out in the UK through Sphere Books. And I remember it had sort of like a bright sort of purplish cover with a UFO on the front cover, and it sort of really stood out. And, I was like, wow, I'm going to get this book. And so, either spent my pocket money on it or by my, delivering the newspapers, which I used to do as a kid, and saving it up, sort of typical scenario, and took it home and read it. And it sort of fascinated me because, at that age, I was just getting into the subject, and also, it was stuff I'd obviously never heard of as well. And so Brad's was really, Brad, I should say, was one of the first people who sort of really got me interested in all this.
So you read the book, and a brilliant mind was turned on, just like a glowing light bulb.
Exactly, something like that, yeah. But yeah, I mean, and I like the fact that as I read more of Brad's books, that he wasn't someone who just focused on one subject. And there's nothing wrong with focusing on one thing, but I like the fact that whenever I've found a book of Brad's, that it would always be pretty much on a different subject. One book might be a UFO book, then one might be a ghost book, and then one is just across the board mysteries, like Mysteries of Time and Space. And that way I think Brad's writing and his subject matters have never become predictable because you can't predict what the next book's going to be. And I like that. And I guess probably perhaps unconsciously, subconsciously, however you want to term it, I've sort of, I guess, tried to emulate that a little bit in terms of the fact that I like to sort of, jump around from different subjects, whether it's Bigfoot, lake monsters, UFOs, and because I think readers appreciate that, if you can give them something new and different every time.
And there are so many exciting topics, subjects to write about. And yet we can see that string, that ties them all together, that binds them together.
Well, you're right. Yeah, you're right.
Yeah, that's one thing. You never just we always say, geez, this is the last book. What could there possibly be that I haven't written about already? And then I open my file drawer, pull out a folder from 30 years ago and say, geez, that sounds like something I haven't covered. And go back and start digging and doing research on whatever the topic might be. Like I've got a huge folder here, and I've been staring at it for years. It's the psychic experiences of people during wartime. Now, I know that there have been works that have been written on that, certainly. But what makes this as unusual is that I actually wrote to a number of military type publications. Like I say, this goes back 40 years ago, whatever. And they printed my name and address and all, and I got actual letters from people, like firsthand stuff. So it's not like I'm sitting here, making this up. This is legitimate, material, most of which has never been published. Just you're out of subject matter. There's something that that grabs your attention the next day, and you're off and running. Brad, is there any one book that sold massive more copies than anything else that you've written?
Oh, I suppose Mysteries of Time and Space is way up there. The Real Ghosts, Restless Spirits, and Haunted Places. And then the two books that Sherry and I did on conspiracies just keeps going and going and going. Revelation of the Divine Fire was really an in book at the time. I got letters from a lot of celebrities, movie stars, and so forth. My son is in this cult. My daughter's doing this. Help me, help me. And the book wasn't really about that. It was just about the whole idea of what is revelation, what is the process, and my contention that the mechanism is the same, regardless your religious or spiritual faith. So those books are up at the top. I suppose interestingly, though I really just edited it, Project Boo Book, that sold worldwide.
People still ask about that book.
Yeah,
now, I got
it's still selling, I noticed, but now so many of those books I just mentioned, except the ones that we keep alive one way or another, they're for like $200 or $300, or Sherry found one for $600, and that's just ridiculous that they paid that much, for a out-of-print book.
I don't think people actually pay that much. I hate to say that, Brad, because I've seen a number of books that Beckley and I have done, like on Amazon, that people are selling for just these outrageous amounts. I suppose they're thinking that, well, if I sell one, hey, I'm in.
Yes, absolutely, yes. And in most cases, they don't even own the book. If somebody does happen to order it from them, then they'll order it from Amazon and have Amazon drop ship it to them. So it's not like, I get the same $3.75 a copy, no matter what they sell it for.
It's interesting too, and Nick, I know you started to notice this. I'm quite certain you have. That a book you wrote some years ago and maybe didn't get as well a reception as you had hoped is now starting to sell well, and vice versa. Books that you had great hopes for. Now, the one we were talking earlier about, my book, Atlantis Rising. Now, I think that has to be included because that's already gone, or before it went out of print, it was in 12 printings. And it had just sold all over, which led then to Worlds Before Our Own and Mysteries of Time and Space and so forth. It is one thing I found out, and I had a wise publisher tell me when I was a young sprout, is that a book is forever. And I found that out when this year, the UK publication, Tim, you were aware of it, a Dark Knight or whatever it is. Anyway, they did a feature on me, very nice feature, as the horror's first historian, because of a 2-book project I did in 1965. And, this book has just lain, and now suddenly here's this very bright young actor, writer in London, who writes this article saying, he collected it as a child, he's had it, he went to find a lot of the movie stills himself. And, lo and behold, something I wrote in 1965 is suddenly getting a 2-page spread in a British magazine, and very nice complimentary things are being said about it. So you just never know. That's the upside and the exciting side of writing. And then there's, we could sit around over a beer and talk about the depressing parts of writing as well.
Well, I remember, Brad, you also for a while there were writing fiction. It's not something that you did a lot of, but you did a book, The Hypnotist.
Yeah, I started when I was in college, I was editing the student newspaper, and it had a reputation in our college of getting all-American awards, so the pressure was on. So I was up all night working on the paper because I was editor, and then I would come home and then maybe go to class in like 2 hours, so why go to bed? So I sit down and write a short story. But most of those were fiction. I really wanted to be a fiction writer, historical romances. I wanted to write that kind of sweeping novel. But my area of interest was, of course, always the paranormal. So even the detective stories I wrote for Eloise Crean, Alfred Hitchcock, people like that, they still had a paranormal twist to it. Almost all of them. I can't think of one that didn't have a paranormal twist, even though they were detective stories or mystery stories. So the novels then were a chance. The interesting thing, and here again, I bring out my crying towel, so bear with me. Every one of my 3 novels were optioned by a motion picture company before publication. Not one ever made it to the movies. But my nonfiction book, Valentino, and then the one we did on Strange Powers, that was more a documentary. Valentino, of course, that was, again, a British production, Ken Russell with the great ballet master in it himself. So that I just decided, well, truth is stranger than fiction. And I guess there's a message for me here. I'll stay with nonfiction. But, every once in a while, I think, now that's a great idea for a novel. So who knows? You might see another novel from me yet.
Well, I remember back when you wrote The Hypnotist, and there were a couple other books. We tried to get some studio interest in those titles and some of the other things. We had some great ideas and things like that. But
right.
You got to kind of conceive of a lot. Hollywood is a whole different game, and you're waiting to hear, to see if it ever happens, and then, like you say, Walt Disney never calls back one day or something.
Yeah. But my kids, they did really relish those special pens and gifts that they sent with us every time.
Well, now, Brad, what about? Did you have any books that you were positive that were just going to be bestsellers, or that you absolutely loved and they just went absolutely nowhere?
I don't think so. I certainly am not infallible, but I do have a pretty good sense. Things are getting removed now. It's not like when I went to New York once a month or whatever, and Tim and I and others would get together and we talk about what's going and where should we do a conference and build something around it. So I think I've been. I won't say it's been a smash every time. I'm not saying that, guys. Please don't misinterpret. But I can't say there's any great disappointment. You see, a book like Hollywood and the Supernatural, we thought would take off a little more. But then, golly, we did a special for HBO. We did a special for Japanese television. We were on all the entertainment shows, Hollywood Tonight, and all the shows. So it got us a lot of publicity for that book and others. So I guess there's kind of a balancing project. I mean, principle, I meant to say. A balancing principle, at least it has been for me and for the books that Sherry and I have done.
Well, the last few years, of course, like I say, the writing and the publishing field is changing. It certainly changed almost overnight. But I look at it as no matter what I do, even if it doesn't sell that 5,000 copies or 10,000 copies that it might have done 10 years ago, I'm still promoting myself, and you never know when something down the road that you're not even aware of at this moment might actually click. So you got to kind of have to go into it in that respect, that you can't necessarily have immediate gratification.
No, and Tim, the important point you made earlier about the marvelous magical days of the paperback.
Oh yeah.
I mean, it's hard getting used to not hearing the publisher saying that the first print run is 250,000.
Oh my God! Yes, absolutely.
Or with Project Blue Book, the first press run was 1 million.
Oh my God!
And
well, an ad for that book ran on the back cover of every UFO magazine and Inquirer for a couple of years.
I see it's still on. It's still on Amazon. I saw it not too long ago. They're acting like they're still selling it, and the numbers weren't that.
I have seen it in the in Barnes and Noble. You know, there's a couple of books. There's a book by T. Lopsic Rapa called The Third Eye. You know, we've published quite a few of his books, and of course he's been deceased for many years. But that book, The Third Eye, when was that written? 1953 or something like that. That book still remains in print. You know, there are a couple of titles like that just stay around, forever. A Dweller on Two Planets that I know Nick contributed as some material to that we put out. We had Sean Castile kind of edit the book, which was a monumental task, and try to modernize it a little bit because the language and the English in there was a little bit
stilted for today. But I've said before, and I've tried to say it in the reviews for your books, you guys are just doing a tremendous service to the field by keeping those old classics that, you know, the guys and gals who sit and watch the TV shows on the paranormal and think they're getting educated, you know, they'll never hear about them. They'll never read them unless they happen to get one of your newsletters, which is very good, by the way. But, I mean, you're just doing a great service. And if you have Sean or if you have Tim, you know, kind of dress it up a little bit or put it into a context, there is absolutely nothing offensive about that in the pure academic sense. This is just bringing it into the context so people today can apprehend it.
We've done quite a few fascinating titles that would have been lost for all time. We did a book recently on Mad Molly from Brooklyn, who was this super sensitive. She had a kind of a religious twist to her psychic nature, but you know she supposedly didn't eat or sleep for 5 or 10 years or something like that. You know, we actually got a decent review in the 14 Times. I think gave us an 8 or a 9. And that's something they don't normally do to too many of our books, you know. And the Davenport brothers, I did a book recently. Now, as far as I'm concerned, they were either the greatest hoaxers in spiritualism or the best mediums of all time, depending upon what you want.
That's right.
Believe
that's right.
And we've kept the dispute between Houdini and Conan Doyle going for quite a number of years here. I think we have about 3 different books on the subject. And the Sci-Fi Channel actually has a series that started, but I guess I don't think anybody knows about it because it's already on Amazon or something like that. I guess it's been going for about a month or so now. Doyle and Houdini. Of course, it's all hyped up and it has nothing to do.
All hyped up. Hyped up.
And there's actually even a series in England about Harry Price that has nothing to do with Harry Price, but they've used his name or something like that. Well, we are coming very close to the end of the Brad Steiger tribute. And I just want to say, Nick, what are you working on now? What can we look forward to seeing from you in the next month or so?
Well, in about 6 weeks' time, I've got a book coming out called Women in Black, which is like, as the title suggests, it's sort of female counterparts of the Men in Black. And I've got dozens of accounts of people had UFO encounters and then being visited by these sort of creepy women in black. And it's sort of very, I guess, underappreciated aspects of the UFO phenomenon. So, hopefully people will find that intriguing, sort of after 70 years, a new angle or a relatively new angle that
you are the MIB man of the hour. There's no doubt about it. This would be your 4th book on the Men in Black?
Well, I've done 3 on the Men in Black, and this one will be the Women in Black. That would be 4, yeah.
Well, keep turning them out, Nick, and every time you have a new book, we'll have you on the show.
All right, and congratulations with everything, Brad.
Thank you, Nick.
Well,
I
must say this is the fastest 2 hours, and it has been a real enjoyable. Tim, wouldn't you agree? It's been a very enjoyable evening.
Oh, it's anytime we get a chance to talk to Brad, it's enjoyable.
And we look forward to. I haven't read your new book yet. I hope to crack it open very soon. Well, I kind of started on it, but I've got so much here to. Been working on a Nazi time travel book. That's our next.
Well,
down the road.
The book is on the way to you, because I told the publisher, Tim is one of my oldest friends, will do a great job, but he wants to do another program, so he should have a book.
Yeah, we probably were sent a book, but if you remember, we had a fire in the building.
Yeah,
so,
I know you were sent one, and I know I'm going to get that from the publicist.
I'm sure it went back along with a lot of the other mail or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And anyway, thank you, Brad, and say.
Well, thank you. Yeah. Thank you and all the people who popped in. I'm sitting here still kind of stunned and amazed, and
say hello to
blessings
Sherry
to all of you.
Say hello to Sherry for me.
You've been listening to Exploring the Bizarre with hosts Timothy Beckley and Tim Swartz. They're taking back the night by jetting non-stop across the cosmos in search of the truly bizarre and totally unexplained, with you as their co-pilot. Thursday nights at 7 p.m. Pacific, 10 p.m. Eastern, on the KCOR Digital Radio Network. For more information on Exploring the Bizarre and hosts Timothy Beckley and Tim Swartz, check out their KCOR Digital Radio Network page. Follow their YouTube channel at MRUFO 1100. Exploring the Bizarre.